There are problems that every city on the peninsula deals with: traffic, pollution, crime, racial chasms, disappearing affordable housing, disappearing open space, to name just a handful. Progress for one city might mean more traffic and pollution for its neighbor. With me today are three mayors of bordering cities. Gary Fazzino is the mayor of Palo Alto, R.B. Jones is the mayor of East Palo Alto, and Paul Kalachi is the mayor of Menlo Park. Recently, Gary Fazzino gave his State of the City address, and he had Mayor Jones and Kalachi with him on the stage. The point is being made loud and clear that a bright vision, a healthy vision for the quality of life on the peninsula in any of our cities must include regional planning and cooperation. Border Crossings is a new show produced by the Mid-Peninsula Access Corporation, MPAC, which will explore the intersections between these communities. We'll look for solutions that can be shared. We'll confront the tensions which need to be talked about. We'll see what policymakers have to say about regional challenges and problems. We want to pose questions and comments that come from you, the viewers, we, the constituents. So call or fax in questions. We also have a roving band of video volunteers who will bring their cameras to the streets to collect some of the questions. But let's begin with a brief update from each mayor about the big votes occurring before each council in the coming weeks. I'll start with Paul Kalachi from Menlo Park.
Well, the first big one we'll do with our noise ordinance. We've been working on a comprehensive noise ordinance to try to reduce excess noise in the community. That's different than the leaf blower ordinance, so that's another one that's down further on. We also have a big proposal coming in from a big landowner, SRI, and they'll come ahead with a master plan, so that's possibly an intensification in the center of our city, so we'll have to deal with that. Longer term, we have our recreational facilities, so we're looking at revamping all of the facilities citywide, and then we have our smart growth, which is our comprehensive plan update. So we've got some big issues on the table.
Big dish, big plate. R.B. Jones of East Palo Alto.
Well, of course, we have a large plate as well. Redevelopment and the completion of the Gateway 101 Center, the Ravenswood 101 Center, is certainly a priority to us. We don't do well to talk about a financial base and financial stability unless we can actually get that Gateway Ravenswood 101 Center up and going. Along with it come the problem of relocation and displacement of constituents. It's highly emotional. It's a real situation. People have to be moved around. That's an uncomfortable kind of behavior for the council, for the city, as well as the tenants, and we have to deal with that. We'll be meeting on retreating on April 10th to begin a discussion of a visioning plan that we have already floated the RFP for, to try and engage all of the concerns and the visions of all of our stakeholders into what we actually want our city to look like. The council know, the redevelopment agency know, and certain other community activists know, but the whole city has not yet had their vision incorporated. And so we are making haste to get ready for that vision and plan. The University Circle project is before us. We feel very confident that as a result of the court settlement that we'll be able to move forward with that particular project as well, because it's not a cure-all just to have Ravenswood 101. And so all of the issues around, again, everything that we have learned, hopefully, from Ravenswood 101, we now have to put in place for the University Circle project: relocation, dislocation, the acquiring of property, fulfilling the dream, meeting with developers, talking with tenants, securing tenants.
Okay, I'm going to move over and get the Palo Alto news. There's a lot from East Palo Alto, obviously.
Yeah.
Gary Fazzino.
Next week, LA, we're going to talk about the possibility of a fiber to the home trial. As you know, Palo Alto has a fiber optic infrastructure, and we're looking at the possibility of connecting that system to a number of individual homes in one or more neighborhoods on a trial basis. I think the larger question is, what is the role of the city in providing communications utility services to individual homes? Over the next few weeks, we'll be talking about Stanford land use in the county. course, the county last night approved a new process to address Stanford's land use development needs over the next 10 years, and Palo Alto will be very active in that effort. We will also be talking about the future of the old Palo Alto Medical Foundation site, just south of the downtown area. A number of interests, of course, affordable housing, market rate housing, and park space, parkland. And in addition to that, I'm certain we'll be continuing to talk about historic preservation, flood management through possible establishment of a joint powers agreement to address creek improvements, and I suspect we'll be talking about that later. I fear we may also hear from dog owners during the next week or two. You may have read.
A lot of tickets.
Well, yes. Our Animal Services Department has decided to ticket dog owners who put their dogs, take their dogs off leashes in public parks. And of course, one group you never want to offend as a politician are dog owners. So I suspect we may hear from them as well. But I am convinced we'll find a compromise and make the dog owners happy, but at the same time address some legitimate safety concerns in parks.
Can you foresee a meeting where 1,000 dogs come to the city hall?
Oh, well, we have a dog run. Why shouldn't we have a dog city council meeting?
Oral communications,
Exactly.
Well, I'd like to move to another segment, and what we're going to do over the next 20 minutes is address questions to individual mayors. We went out and, like I mentioned before, with some of the interns at MPAC, collected some questions out in the street. And the first couple of questions deal with something you probably hear a lot of, maybe even more than dog problems, and that's street problems. So let's go to our roll-in.
Dear Mayor, I'm a routine cyclist. I cycle every day, and I ride a lot of city streets, and I try to ride the bike routes. There's also a lot of streets that are just in horrible, horrible condition. Like, for instance, the whole length of Homer Avenue. And there's places like on Emerson that are just why these ruts are there. I mean, if you were to ride it on a bicycle yourself, you'd see how dangerous they are.
One of the major concerns here in this community in East Palo Alto is the streets. We got a lot of people that's barely making it on their income, and with our streets and the way that they're situated presently, the problem is that it's tearing up the vehicles. And I mean, now we got to not only try to survive with what we have, we got to go out and pay for damages to the vehicles. I mean, it's not that, and there's a lot more problems that we have here that we should be concerned about, but that's one of our major concerns, especially in the back areas, you know. It's really nasty around the winter when it started raining. I mean, we get potholes, and it's just tearing our vehicles up.
Okay, so can you take a minute or two, RB, and give some street news?
Well, we have a pavement management system that we finally have in place. There's certain amounts of monies that through cigarette tax, gas tax, that's allowable for the use to do streets. Without making excuses, we inherited the streets. We inherited the infrastructure from the county, but we wanted cityhood. And along with that desire to determine our own future comes some of the potholes, and the potholes of life for that matter. And the streets are just one example of that. And we're working again, trying to secure funds to make that happen.
Is there any schedule right now for certain streets to get fixed? Are there certain streets you can say are going to be repaired real soon?
Yes, I can't name the streets in particular right this moment, but there is a schedule and there are streets designed to be done. Now, of course, University Avenue is now State Highway 109, and so the state pumps money into that to keep it up. But we spent the initial $570,000 to make that street a passable street. And so the 45,000 cars a day that come down that street, of course, are not necessarily all of our citizens for sure. But that street needed to be repaired, and we got the money and we fixed it, and now the state is going to keep it up. We made the initial push to do that. And so there are other side streets that's
But are you waiting for money to come in before most of the streets will be able to be repaired? Is that the next step?
we're trying to resurface streets as we have the money. And very certainly, the money needs to be there first in
Yeah.
order to make that happen.
The pavers want to eat.
Yes, they want to get paid,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
And what about Palo Alto? I don't know particularly about Emerson. I live on Emerson, but
Right.
my block's okay.
Well, I think that Palo Alto streets generally are in pretty good shape relative to other communities. At the same time, we recognized back in the late 80s when we established obtained approval from the voters for the utility tax that we needed to put a percentage of that revenue into street and sidewalk repair. And in fact, we are, since 1988, we have put $1 million more into street and sidewalk repair on an annual basis. We have a multiple-year plan to address street and sidewalk issues. At the same time, we recognize there are some real problem areas. Part of the problem, Elliot, in the downtown area has been associated with major public works and utilities projects, which has, had the effect of, tearing up streets in that area. And so, those projects are coming to, some of those projects, most of those projects, I should say, are coming to a close, and so the downtown area should look much better by the end of the summer than it does right now. We're also looking at the possibility of additional funding for streets, sidewalks, storm drainage, other major infrastructure, possibly through a bond measure that would go before the voters over the next couple of years. But the city does have an actual plan to take care of street and sidewalk repairs over the next 10 or 12 years. And citizens can go to City Hall and find exactly
When their
street
street
is scheduled for improvements.
Same in East Palo
Yes,
Alto.
very certainly,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's go to our next question from the street. I think this one's about parking.
Parking is a big issue in Palo Alto, and I think they've done a lot with the color zones. I think they work really well because you can actually drive downtown during the day and park. It's becoming more that in the evenings there's less parking, and I think we need to keep working on parking. But then again, I live downtown, so I don't want huge structures. So find a way to make both those things work.
Can you work a miracle? Can you get more parking downtown and not make a parking
Unreal what
structure?
the public has.
Well, we're clearly victims of our own success. I mean, downtown Palo Alto is a regional destination, and it is very difficult to find parking there, certainly during the day. However, I would argue that's not the case at night. The Cowper-Webster Garage, which is only a few blocks away from any destination in downtown Palo Alto, always has parking available at night. In fact, we are able to use 2 additional floors of parking on that structure after 5 o'clock. So I would encourage people to look at the Cowper-Webster Garage as an alternative for parking, and I suspect they'll find it there. I think that the questioner asked a good question about the proper balance between addressing current parking concerns at the same time, because we have a deficit of about 1,500 parking spaces in the downtown area due to employment and uses there. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is create an incentive for more people to come into the downtown area and park their cars there. So while we're looking at the possibility of an additional parking structure or 2, we are also looking at the creation of a shuttle system, which I would eventually like to see connected to Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and Stanford, which I believe would resolve many of the parking problems that we currently have during the day. I think we should look at the possibility of working with downtown employers and providing shuttle service for their employees and having their employees park in peripheral locations, much like what Stanford does during the holiday season for its employees at the Stanford Shopping Center.
So you kind of, if it's not a limbo, it's between a rock and a hard place. Like you've got people upset because they can't find parking, but you don't want to encourage more people driving their cars into downtown.
Exactly.
So you're, and I was reading in the paper just the other day that Menlo Park is dealing with exactly the same set of issues of downtown parking. In fact, I read in East Palo Alto that there's the merchants are complaining that that they need more the parking was taken away because of bike lanes. But I wanted to go to Paul and ask you, I know there's some people who are advocating, and even your consultant came back with plans for possible parking structures downtown. Is that going to happen?
The consultant came back with what we did was a capacity study to find out where our parking is right now in the downtown area. There are two different findings. We have a lot of private parking, and we didn't know about that. But as far as the public lots are concerned, we're at about the threshold of capacity. I mean, we really have another 10%, but you don't want to get above the 90% threshold. When you look at all the private parking that's down there, and some parking is fungible, some of that private parking could be used for people who are generally shopping, such as Trader Joe's parking or other parking, then we're down considerably less than the 90%. So we're not in the same situation that Palo Alto is. We're not feeling the pain. Customers' perceptions are that parking's not a problem for them. Business perceptions are they're not losing business as a result of parking. People are complaining if they have to park a block away. So having to park a block away, life could be worse. We don't necessarily
have to park all the way at Cowper-Webster.
Well, I have a cruise where I go through Palo Alto in order to find parking, so we don't have to do that in Menlo Park. But we're wrestling with the same problems that Gary talked about. We don't want to encourage people to drive in. We know that a lot of our demand is employee demand, and so we're wondering if we can find other ways to get employees in, or whether we can have satellite parking and shuttle the employees, or what we can do, whether we can cash them out. So we think that we have an opportunity at this point to look for alternatives to try to keep Menlo Park's downtown thriving. We don't envision being a regional downtown, but sometimes when the economic engine gets going, we don't have a choice about that. Once it's going, it's going. But we'll use this as an opportunity to look at some alternative ways and not rule out a structure at all. So we have a Caltrain station, which might be a good location for a structure. We might be able to share some funding in some locations with Caltrain and provide additional parking. So
I'd like to ask more about both of you have mentioned a shuttle and extending it to East Palo Alto as well. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit later. But let's go to another question from the street. I believe this will be on East Palo Alto's relocation process.
To the mayor of East Palo Alto, I would like to understand, how did the redevelopment come up with offering apartment owners money for relocation, such as a down payment for a home? How do you come to the common knowledge that apartment dwellers should get almost $35,000 or more to relocate, when the average government employee, or when we're relocating, they only offer a certain mileage or percentage? Tell me, how did you guys come to that conclusion that this was the money that they should get and pay renters, those who found rental apartments, almost $1,400 a month for rent for 4 years? If the articles are not true in the San Jose Mercury, please, tell them to correct it.
And RB, is your answer.
Redevelopment law is a very crude animal. It's a very confusing animal. We have in our history in East Palo Alto that other crude animal called rent control. And as a result of rent control, rents did not go up marginally like it did in other communities. And so redevelopment law is very clear. It says that when you relocate people for the purposes of redevelopment, you have to offer a category of housing that's over and above, in most cases, what people already lived in. It has to be safe, it has to be decent. If 7 people, for instance, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, the law says that when you relocate them, you have to give them the room equivalent by state standards for 7 people to live in. That would require a 3 or even a 4-bedroom place. Because, again, of rent control, where the rent did not go up, it only went up 7% per year at the most. And we know the great increase now of rent for rental properties in the state of California. But in this area in particular, the law says then for a cap of $400, we have to pay each family up to $400 to supplement their rental income for moving out of a place so that we can do redevelopment. That's state law. That's not something we created.
$400 more than they were paying per month?
Yes. So if, for instance, right now a family who lives in an apartment is not, the constituent was mistaken, it's not the apartment owner, it is the renter in the apartment. So if that family is paying $800 a month rent, and we move them because we want to build this shopping center, and the rent in the next place is $1,200, we have to pay that $400. They still pay $800, but we have to pay that $400 a month up to 4 years. And that is just the nature of the law. It certainly hurts us. It causes havoc in relocation funds, because you can't, until you expend those funds, you can't spend the money to buy the land, to develop the land, to create the businesses, and start the tax monies coming in.
So you think rent control has come back to bite you, basically?
In this sense, it certainly has. In this sense, it certainly has.
Yeah. All right. Well, what I'd like to do now is just ask a couple of, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We have one more question from the streets. This one is directed, I believe, to Gary, and I think it's from a Stanford student. So let's look.
Trees on El Camino, a big issue. London plane trees, I believe, are proposed. Those that are there that I've seen are not very attractive. It would be nice to think of a different sort of tree to really put some effort into beautifying El Camino.
That was not the Stanford student. That's a resident of Palo Alto who wants to see a better variety of tree chosen for El Camino. How can tree lovers register with
Well,
the
let me
council?
comment quickly on this question. Several levels. First of all, we and the council recognized in the early 90s that we had not paid adequate attention to our trees, our urban forest. And of course, we have a spectacular urban forest here in Palo Alto, but due to the drought and other reasons, we pretty much ignored our urban forest during the 1980s. There was a wonderful public-private partnership that became a reality. Canopy Trees for Palo Alto. It's a private group, receives city funding. Over the past 3 years, it has planted well over 300 trees in Palo Alto, and it intends to accelerate its efforts to plant trees throughout the community. So that's the one response. Second response, El Camino. I think we all agree that El Camino needs to be beautified. My vision is that El Camino look like it does in Burlingame. I think it's pretty ugly along stretches here in Palo Alto, and I think tree planting is a significant part of it. A group has formed over the past 6 months, including residents, architects, business owners, and others, who are planning to bring a plan to the City Council to beautify El Camino Real, and the center post of that plan is tree planting. And so I would encourage this particular questioner to get involved with this effort. Tony Carrasco, who's an architect in the downtown area, along with Betty Meltzer, a resident of Crescent Park, have been leading this effort, and I'd encourage him to contact them.
Or maybe call Canopy as well.
Or call Debbie Mytels at Canopy to get involved in the larger tree issue.
Great. Okay, and our last questioner, I believe, again, will be the Stanford student. Let's see if I'm right.
We'll have RB answer this.
Okay.
I'm a grad student at Stanford, and I live in the city of Palo Alto off campus. And I'm concerned about housing on campus, which is a concern for the city of Palo Alto as well, because Stanford wants to build more graduate student housing, and it's either the county or the city which has posed opposition to construction. So that's something I'm concerned about, because housing here is very unaffordable, and students need a place to live. So I think I guess that you should support any building of housing on campus. Thanks.
Has the Palo Alto Council had some effect on whether Stanford can build more student housing?
Well, in fact, the Palo Alto City Council has endorsed the Stanford plan to build more graduate student housing. We believe that housing should be a priority for Stanford, both under the current general use permit as well as under the new proposed community plan. which they're going to be submitting to the county later this year. She may be speaking about some of the concerns expressed by me and others last summer, that the council was surprised, blindsided by news of this proposal and the suggestion that it be included under the next community plan rather than the current general use permit. But those issues have been resolved, and the council has enthusiastically embraced the idea of graduate housing, and we would love to see more graduate student housing on campus beyond the proposal which is currently being put forward by the university.
May I speak to this too?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Menlo Park also endorsed the idea of graduate housing on Stanford University. We're very supportive to the housing. When the proposal for student housing first came out, there was some amount of development left in the cap, the development cap of the general use permit. At that time, Stanford wanted to pursue the housing outside of that cap, and that's, I think, what both Palo Alto and Menlo Park...
Outside of the amount of footage or outside?
Correct.
of
They wanted to
the-
keep that 400,000 square feet and then get a separate use permit to pursue the housing. And we said, you've got enough square footage under the current cap.
Use it for housing.
Use it for housing. And
Well, I
that-
think people would be surprised to hear that Menlo Park was actually endorsing Stanford development. And when we get back in a moment, we're going to talk about some of the more thorny issues between the three cities that you are now wading through, that you're all starting to work together on. We'll be right back after this message.
Sign up for one of MPAC's low-cost video production classes and create a program for the Mid-Peninsula's Electronic Town Square, Channel 6 and 77. Join a studio production crew or borrow MPAC cameras and videotape interviews, lectures, events, and performances. Let your inner videographer out for some fun. For details, call 494-8686 or visit www.mpactv.org.
Welcome back to Border Crossings. I'm joined here by the three mayors of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and we're talking over some of the regional issues in this segment of Border Crossings. And I'd like to kind of review some of the more difficult issues that have happened over the past year. Sand Hill Road projects that Stanford proposed, which will bring housing development, an expansion of the Stanford Mall, and a widening from 2 to 4 lanes of Sand Hill Road, became a pitched battle, not only between Menlo Park and Palo Alto, but even within Palo Alto, we had a very hotly contested ballot initiative measure. And I'm just wondering now, in hindsight, which is always more clear, could the process of negotiation have happened differently to have avoided it becoming as contentious as it did? Either one of you. In fact, if you want to talk just among each other, that's fine too.
Well, I'll start since we ultimately approved a project. I did support the final compromise. I do believe that the most significant issues were vetted in the community. I don't have any concerns about the adequacy of the environmental impact report. At the same time, I do acknowledge and accept Menlo Park's legitimate concerns about the impact of the project. Early on, I argued that the solution to everyone's concerns would be to move the housing across the street, Sand Hill, to the what I call the southern side of Sand Hill Road, preserve the property next to the creek in open space, and I truly believe that would go a long way towards addressing Menlo Park's concerns about the development. But the majority of the council felt otherwise, and as I said, I felt there were other components of the project which made it easier for me to approve a final compromise. But there's no question in my mind that the project will have a significant impact on Menlo Park, and I think we did have a joint meeting with Menlo Park during this process. It's too bad that we were unable, given the nature of the Brown Act, that we were unable to engage in a conversation with Menlo Park to a much greater degree. Instead, and I know that was one of Paul's first meetings as an elected official.
First one.
First one.
First one.
And I mean, it was a fascinating.
What are you talking about?
Well, this is a joint meeting between Menlo Park and Palo Alto, and Menlo Park had the opportunity to comment on the Sand Hill proposal. Well, we were advised by our city attorney not to say anything.
Oh, my Lord.
And so we sat there, like 9 emperors or judges, listening and nodding whenever something was said.
Did you know that? Their
We
city
did not
attorney-
know that they were under advice. We thought they were very polite.
It's a quiet bunch.
It was a
there,
unique
Palo Alto.
opportunity.
So, in retrospect, I wish there had been more of a conversation
Yes.
between the two communities about impacts of the project.
So you're not allowed to get together unless it's an official meeting that's
Well, once
been
the
noticed?
process, once the clock begins, and we're in the process of hearing public testimony, we cannot respond to individual speakers. Now, in retrospect, what we should have done is we should have held a meeting prior to submission of a formal project so that we could have understood better what Menlo Park's concerns were, rather than simply sending a letter to Menlo Park asking them, and to East Palo Alto, asking them to comment on the plan.
Yeah, the other part that's ironic about it is that East Palo Alto were in fact left out of it. And you only have to have Stanford have a soccer game on Saturdays to realize the negative impact of traffic in East Palo Alto. You don't get out of your driveways when this kind of thing happens. So it's impossible to move that volume of people. Or to talk about any kind of movement of traffic and people that affects Willow Road, that affects Stanford, that affects University Avenue, unless you assume that all of the traffic is going to come down 280 and get off there and come in the back way to Stanford. Anything else affects East Palo Alto. And that kind of mitigation we were not involved or included in that. But very certainly it's impossible for it to happen without us being affected by it. And to this date, we still have not been. And that, in retrospect, if we had to do it again, we would be more assertive in saying, hey, look, hey, we need a chair at that particular table because we are impacted by this. And so what we hope now happens is that as a result of our respectively staying out of it and stepping back and whatever, even though we were impacted, that when we do building and when we begin to develop our own community, folks will say, well, East Palo Alto is impacted by what we do. And they made some concessions to stay out of some things, and to help and to give in some issues. And so we in turn will do the same kind of thing because that's going to be necessary for us to grow as well.
Well, Menlo Park, on the other hand, did not relax and say, go ahead. In fact, Menlo Park filed a suit against Palo Alto. And it lost, but my understanding is it's going to be appealed, or has that been decided?
It has been appealed and is out in legal limbo somewhere, so that process is going on.
So when you're talking to your counterpart, Gary, what's the message that you hope he would hear from the neighbors in Menlo Park?
Just what we want or how we felt about the process. Or it's a very difficult situation because of the geography. It's really a piece of ground or of geography that's more a part of the vision of the city of Menlo Park than Palo Alto. It's west of El Camino. It's in the north part of the city. It doesn't really, it's not a neighborhood that's incorporated in the feeling of neighborhood in Palo Alto. So I understand that it doesn't appear in their consciousness in quite the same way it does in ours. We have another situation where Menlo Park and Stanford may have a different vision for what's going to happen in the corridor, and so that's what's in clash. And if you have a vision clash, it's hard to resolve that sometimes. Menlo Park probably could have. I mean, Gary pointed out that we were rookie amateurs. We're amateur politicians, but we were rookies. I mean, now at least we have a little experience. We probably could have communicated ourselves better, both to Palo Alto and to the region. We did support aspects and elements of the project. We certainly supported the extension. We could have supported housing in Ohlone Field, although we agreed with what Gary said, that Stanford, if you're going to have open space, or you're going to have playing fields, or if you're going to have housing, we'd certainly like the less intensive use here. We know it's your property, you can do what you want, but we think there are better locations for the housing. The widening of the road was a difficult part for us, and that had a lot to do, we think, with the medical center. So that's yet to be resolved because of the circulation in there and circulation in the area of Stanford. Our message to Palo Alto would be, I think, that we would like Stanford to develop in such a way that it uses its own street system, because it does have streets that are capable of carrying some of that traffic. And aside from that, I think I would apologize to the extent that anything that we did or said would cause our relationship to suffer as a result of that. I certainly don't back down on the position, and none of us take it personally, although I think a lot of individuals think that because there's a lawsuit on the table that we take it personally, or that we're not friends, or that we're not cooperating in a lot of other places. I think of it more as, you know, he's wearing the blue uniform, I'm wearing the red uniform, he's the running back, I'm the tackle, I've got to tackle him. It's not personal. So we were both, and in that sense, the fact that we have to represent our jurisdictions is part of the conflict. Our general plan really required us to go in there and make, to oppose that project if we couldn't make certain findings, and we were never able to make those findings.
If Menlo Park could win on appeal, then what would you see, what changes would there be?
I think there's always been a misunderstanding of the significance of the lawsuit. CEQA is a procedural law. To win it just meant that there is some procedure that wasn't followed correctly that would need to be followed correctly. So, and in this case, the value of the CEQA lawsuit always with a project is whether or not you can delay the project, and whether or not the person who's doing the project has limited or infinite financial resources. Stanford University has relatively infinite financial resources. Regardless of whether or not we would have won the appeal, they would eventually produce the information, go through the procedure and the process, and probably build the project. The only opportunity to change it, I think, would be if the new information were so earth-shattering that the city of Palo Alto said we want to reconsider. I don't think they will. So I don't think the lawsuit really, from our point of view, it was, we do think that the EIR and the process had some flaws in it, some serious ones that I don't want to bring out here. But so in that sense, I think it was the right thing to do. But I don't think that the lawsuit in the end, no matter how it turns out, is going to impact how this project moves forward. It would just impact the timing of it.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised? Was the council surprised by the lawsuit or not?
No, absolutely not. I mean, Menlo Park had made its position very clear, and I mean, they certainly have the right, to pursue legal options, particularly if they believe that's the will of the community. And I think Paul's correct. I mean, there aren't any, I think our relationships at a personal level are outstanding. There isn't any ill will as a result of those, of that lawsuit. Again, getting back to the issue I raised earlier, I wish that in retrospect we'd had conversations much earlier. And talk about being completely surprised by how this issue played in Menlo Park. The meeting that I referred to earlier, at that meeting I mentioned the possibility of sharing incremental sales tax, and Menlo Park residents booed. Now I would expect them to cheer, because here's a wonderful example of regional cooperation. Well, they booed because they were concerned that this became another reason on the part of Palo Alto, a financial reason to support the project, focusing on the financial revenue from the project rather than dealing with the much larger issues of traffic and other impacts.
Impacts on the quality of life,
Yeah.
really. What they were saying is you can't buy away the impacts to us.
So it sounds like you really heard that, though.
Compensation.
Oh, yes. You got that message.
Compensation.
Well, I'm going to switch to another thorny one, and this would involve East Palo Alto and Menlo Park.
I can sit back on this.
Relax for a while, but we'll bring you in again. Because you had your State of the City address, we have to pull you over the coals on. No, I'm talking about the development for University Circle that RB mentioned earlier. And another lawsuit came about because Menlo Park residents were saying this is going to impact us with traffic when a 240-room hotel and 3 10-story office buildings become a reality in East Palo Alto. And here's East Palo Alto starting to get what looks like a solid tax base together. And so another one of these vision clashes, I guess. Again, though, is there anything in the process that, and it's still going on from my understanding, so you can update us, but would you do things differently if you started today?
Well, you know, the suit, the original suit against that particular project by Palo Alto residents as well as the Menlo Park had been settled. And it was airtight. Everybody participated in what the remedy would be. And then the law circle people came around and put forth a project. If there's a concern that, it's just as Paul said, CEQA laws are procedural kinds of things, and they're not always done to stop something. It's to slow it down and to make it, to confuse it and cause chaos so that it possibly and probably won't happen if that's a possibility. But we are very serious about this project. We know that we have a right to develop and to become a self-sustainable community. We felt very comfortable that we had mitigated everything that needed to be mitigated, notwithstanding the fact that we could go by example of so many instances of things being done where there's absolutely no inclusion of East Palo Alto into these things to be mitigated. Folks have a right to develop their communities to the point where they have a tax base. And so we respectfully request that as well. In the past, we've not had the wherewithal to fight it because we didn't have the money for legal fees. And so we had to compromise and roll over and do some things. Fortunately for us, in this instance, the developer were able to and willing to step forward with some funds to make that a reality. If we have some concerns about Menlo Park, even though it was the residents who did it, you know, if you come into East Palo Alto, Menlo Park citizens make a left on Woodland every day, you know, and go through East Palo Alto. And when you hear citizens from another community make statements, and since citizens sued, then you have to listen to that, well, I like to go up there and get barbecue. I mean, is their concern really barbecue? You know, the barbecue place is closed, as a matter of fact, but that is a justification. Some people talked about building a wall. I mean, this is 1999 in the United States of America, not South Africa. This is not apartheid where you separate people by walls and gates and fences and what have you. I believe that if the city of Menlo Park, if the leadership of Menlo Park had really been serious about the behavior of their constituents, like I would be as mayor of ours, or our council would be of ours, we could still have sat down without the lawsuit and began to talk about some things that we could put in place to alleviate some fears about, quote, their quality of life. Because, again, I personally believe that folks have a right to get involved in, quote, their quality of life. But I don't believe that you have the right to stymie other communities for your quality of life if it can be proven that there will not be a major or a negative impact.
Where's the dividing line between when there's an okay amount of preventing traffic flow to where it gets to where it's a walled-off community? How much give and take is there?
It's for me, it stops when it gets to be 45,000 cars a day. That's not my constituents on University Avenue. Approximately 16,000 cars a day on Embarcadero into my feeder streets and what have you. So I have some streets in the back of my city where folks literally cannot get out of their driveways for 35, 40 minutes in the mornings and in the afternoons. And now how do folks find these shortcuts to get to wherever they get to? Well, they're going someplace. They're coming from someplace. Some of these folks are employees of Palo Alto. Some of these folks are residents of Palo Alto who are going out to work and coming back in, going to Mountain View, Silicon Valley. It's a regional kind of thing, Menlo Park and what have you. Some people say, well, Willow Road is too busy, so it's less busy to go down University Avenue.
Right.
You know?
Well,
and that kind of thing.
let's get into that a little later, but what I'm hearing is that when traffic becomes a huge amount of traffic from other communities through your community, it impacts the quality of life.
It certainly does.
In Menlo Park's situation with University Circle, I mean, was it a realistic fear of traffic, or was it like overshooting the bounds of what you should be able to ask of your neighbor?
Can I go back to the first question?
Yeah, go back to the first.
The first question is, could we have done something differently? And I think with this one there was. I think with the Sand Hill there may not have been a configuration that we could all arrive on, so someone was going to win and someone was going to lose. With this one I'm surprised that it didn't settle, that we all didn't come to an agreement ahead of time. I was really surprised. I was part of the negotiations, and then I was away on vacation in July, and even when I came back I thought, oh, we were just an hour away, in an hour's worth of how we were going to do that mitigation away, and so I'm still not sure how and why it fell out. But I think what you said is correct, that it probably fell out on the lack of strength of our relationships. So one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't have you and me and Sharifa and Chuck, which we can have those 4 people in the same room along with Linda Law and some city managers so that we all know what we're saying, and have some good rules in place so that we know that those 4 people have the support both of the remaining parts of their councils and their communities, so there's not leakage in those relationships. This one was one that probably could have had a more harmonious result. We were supportive to the project and are. We originally had our view there was a retail main street. We accepted the office. We see benefit from the project. In fact, many of our neighbors that live close to the area understand the benefits to them. So we didn't really have a desire to reduce that benefit. It's a high benefit, high cost when you look at the traffic. So that's what we really wanted to do, was try to deal with the traffic through the residents. I think there's still an opportunity to do that.
So are you still meeting together or hoping to, as far as like some of the mitigating the traffic devices that could
we can
slow traffic
we
down?
certainly can. We are not, have no plans and are not currently meeting, but there's we can. And
Is that something you want to see happen?
Absolutely, sure. I'd love to see that happen, and if you would be open to that.
Yes, sir. Well, there will be an impact. For sure there will be. There's an impact now. Again, we have a lot of traffic from Menlo Park residents who come down University Avenue, or who get off on University Avenue and make the loop around to come through what we call the Whiskey Gulch area.
Right.
And down the Woodland area. And you can tell by the constant repair of the street in that area that there's a lot of traffic that's going that way. So our folks are not, how you're serving out of town to go down Woodland Creek in the Menlo Park. They're going down University Avenue or getting on the freeway for that matter. And so it wouldn't make sense not to have a conversation, irrespective of the lawsuit, and irrespective of the fact that, quote, we won in this instance.
Right.
There still need to be a
So
relationship.
even though that East Palo Alto won the lawsuit, you think there's some openness to negotiating some ways of lessening the traffic impact on Menlo Park?
Well, it may be just assurance. It may be that the citizens of that community feel
It's just the perception.
Yeah, the perception that here's a major hotel. Okay,
What if
and
they
here's 2 office
measure it
buildings.
and they see that it really has made a lot of difference in traffic? Is that a point where East Palo Alto would be amenable to?
Well, I can't imagine folks coming to stay in a major hotel that's sitting in that corridor, why they would want to get in their rental car and go down East O'Keefe into Menlo Park. That doesn't make sense to me. So it has to be perception. The viability and the stability and the future of my community is too important for me to rest it on some kind of lame assurance like that. But I'm willing to meet because there are folks in the leadership in Menlo Park who are saying, let's talk about it anyway. Let's see if there's anything out there anyway, and let's put some safeguards, because one day I'll be gone and Paul will be gone. And so we need things to be in place. I don't need a neighbor that I have to live by thinking that when RB is gone or when Paul is gone or when an individual is gone, then the integrity of the commitment is gone. We need to do better than that as leaders in our respective communities.
Okay, well, I want to pick up on, there's so many things that we're not going to get to today, and I'll mention when we're coming back together in a couple minutes, but well, I'll mention it now. I think we have, the next time the mayors are going to come in here will be Saturday, May 15th at 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning, and that show will be live so people can call in. So there'll be even more questions. We won't let you out of here till midnight. No, we will. But the other issue that I'd like to get to as we're closing out is one that you brought up, and that's the traffic flow from Dumbarton Bridge through East Palo Alto. Seems like you know, just like the blood flows through our veins and, you know, when it passes the arm, it doesn't stop at the hand, you know, it's going to, traffic is going to be the thing that always makes us aware of our neighbors. But those 45,000 cars, that's a lot of traffic, and I wonder if there's been studies. I imagine most of it, if not the overwhelming amount of it, is not stopping in East Palo Alto. It's people that are coming to work and going home from cities like Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Mountain View and Sunnyvale. What exists to, or what's on the table to try to ease the burden on East Palo Alto? Is there anything that gets discussed that way? I do know of a proposal to build yet another artery off the Dumbarton, and I know Gary's not in favor of this one, but let's hear the reasons, pros and cons of the artery, and any other things that have been on the table to ease the burden. So,
Well, several comments. First of all, I should mention this for the record. Historically, Palo Alto did oppose the new Dumbarton Bridge back in the late 70s, largely because we were concerned that that new bridge would create tremendous traffic problems on this side of the bay. Notwithstanding that, we're here in 1999. The reality is that RB is dealing with literally an obscene amount of traffic on University Avenue. And I witnessed this. I drive through it, and whether I'm going to East Palo Alto or going across the bay, and it's an issue that has to be addressed. I would probably not take the same approach he does, but I propose a couple of alternatives. First of all, long term, and I think Paul is probably much more expert in this issue than I am, but I do believe there's a real opportunity to revive the Dumbarton Rail Bridge, which is a 100-year-old infrastructure, and provide rail service across the bay. That has been discussed once again in the last year or two, and I think if we can bring together the three counties, affected counties, Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties, I think there's a real opportunity to make that a reality. I think that would help significantly. Second, I do view Willow Road as the primary east-west road between the Bay and 101, and anything we can do to move traffic to Willow Road, at least to 101, Paul, rather than University Avenue, we should do it. I mean, frankly, if I were RB, I would look at the real possibility of closing off University Avenue or making it very difficult for people to use University Avenue to get through the community. I think that's something that I would look closely at. I do know that another alternative that has been mentioned is what's called the Southern Connection. And I can assure you that if any Palo Alto mayor or council member supported that alternative, that we would have the political half-life of a flea or a one-term governor of Rhode Island around the turn of the century. It's just not feasible, practical politically. At the same time, I want to do everything I can to work with RB, Paul, and others on a regional basis to see if we can address this, what I consider to be a regional traffic problem, get the traffic off University Avenue, get it on the streets where it belongs, create the possibility of a Dumbarton Rail Bridge alternative, and see if we can't create another connection that does not go through the Palo Alto Baylands.
okay. Well, politics aside, what does that sound like to the two of you? I mean,
there's some agreement in what
we have to be brief because we're running out.
There's some agreement in between myself and what Gary is saying. That railway is something that railway spur across the Dumbarton is something that can take place within a year. You don't have to go and recreate the wheel. That rail is a safe infrastructure. It's there. I mean, let's put a thing on it and have Alameda County put a park in place and respect the whole right-of-way of transportation, and let's start people to coming across there right now. I mean, we should just do that. A second point that can happen without a lot of long study and what have you, although we're going to still talk about this access road from Dumbarton to San Antonio as opposed to Dumbarton to Embarcadero. It may make a difference for your constituents. But if we could take the land in the front of Sun Microsystem that was borrowed from, liberated from East Palo Alto by Menlo Park before Paul got there, and build a shelter and have a shuttle that will make a loop down University Avenue to the Caltrain, over to Menlo Park to the Caltrain, and back up Willow Road to Sun Micro again. And that right now would eliminate a lot of traffic. If we just had the parking facilities there, some kind of temporary structure with the intent of making something really solid and really well done out there, that shuttle service right away could lessen the impact in East Palo Alto. So some of the remedies are not things that we have to go back and you know, recreate the wheel and do. I mean, we can just do them and they'll do it. People will catch the train and they would get on those shuttles and they would come back up Willow Road and they would come back up University Avenue to their cars and go and head across the bay. And I think that we could do those things without a lot of you know, meetings and planning and planning and planning.
At least there's some things that could be started right away.
Sure.
Paul, what about you? Did you hear some things you agree with? Or
Well, I think I'll go to the things we disagree on. We probably do agree that University and Willow are what we would call local serving arterials. So they're arterials in which the regional traffic coming over the Dumbarton Bridge or the regional traffic going up and down 101 would get off and come into our communities because it was there. We would disagree that Willow should be the regional serving. The regional traffic is coming up from Santa Clara and taking a right to go across the Dumbarton Bridge, or it's coming down from San Francisco and taking a left to go across the Dumbarton Bridge. And that's really regional pass-through traffic that's coming through our areas and doesn't have a destination in our mini region. And so it's unclear to us why Willow Road would be the appropriate thing to do. Would be to have multiple feeder systems and to have a real regional exchange, a real regional freeway. Menlo Park, like Palo Alto, so we're very sympathetic to the extent that we're not big on enormous regional freeway exchanges in our community. So we want the circulation and the benefits, but we don't want the impacts and we don't want the roads. I would just say, I guess, that we would be helped by a southern access tremendously. Both of us would be. We disagree on maybe whose road should be used, and we're never going to solve this. And we'll let you off the hook gracefully with this one, understanding that we may have other similar situations, and certainly the Sand Hill corridor will be very sensitive for us in the very same manner. So
sounds similar
Sure.
to the Sand Hill
So in that sense, we will
Yeah.
we'll reserve the right to look
Yeah.
at a local concern and to protect the local concern.
I'm reminded of the book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden,
Right.
when you start talking about regional cooperation.
Now,
It's not easy.
the agreement part is that there are opportunities because of Dunbarton Rail to do transit. So to the extent that we all agree to move ahead with transit, that's where we have some agreement and that's where we can move ahead. Can it solve all the problems? Probably not. Will it help? Certainly.
Well, I'm going to have to move to the end of the show. We had another segment planned, which we'll do next time. It's called Mares Eat Oats, and it's a chance to get to know the three of you more personally and not talk about politics and ask you some more fun, lighthearted questions. But we ran out of time. I want to mention that the show will next be on May 15th live for you to watch, but in the meantime, we'll be doing a taping with Supervisor Joe Simidian about the Stanford land use issues. So stay tuned to Border Crossing in the coming weeks. And thanks for watching tonight. Thanks for the three of you coming tonight. Whoops, that means we're ending the show.
Perfect.
And good night.